Hello and welcome to this SlimDevOps Live episode 41. It's me and Pete again. Hello Pete, how you doing?
I am great. I have been dusting off an old project here that we're going to share. So that's always fun. Reminds you of old times and shows you what you've learned, what you haven't learned, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, life is good. Life is good. How are you doing, Martin?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. So for those of you who are watching this after the fact on YouTube, this was originally streamed live on twitch.tv/SlimDevOps. If you would like to join in live, head over there and give us a follow. So what have you been up to? I know you've been preparing this. I'm looking forward to getting into this. A little bit of looking forward and looking backwards at the same time. But what else have you been up to?
Some fun stuff actually. So I have a talk coming up, which I don't normally do, and I'll send a tweet about that in a minute. But Kit talked me into doing a talk for SlowConf. And
Excellent.
so SlowConf, May 9th through 12th. And I'll be talking about some like growth metric type stuff and applying slow thinking to that. So a lot of the stuff that we were talking about on stream with Kit before. So that was great. If you haven't signed up for SlowConf yet, please do. Cool track there that's like slows for everybody, slows for everybody, I think is what they call it. So not just SRE type stuff, though they do have a bunch of tracks on that if you're interested. But, I think there's like a chef that's going to be on there talking about using slows in the kitchen. There's people from other disciplines who are kind of taking slows and applying it to their work. So I think that'll be super fun. Other than that, we're just like prepping for DockerCon. We're a platinum sponsor this year, and they announced that earlier today, which was really great to see. And our team's been working on a couple talks. Evan, who everybody knows from this stream and who is great, does a really awesome talk on production ready containers. And we're also going to be showing off our Docker extension, which we've been talking a ton about. So,
Indeed.
I know you've been playing around with Docker Desktop for Linux, which seems like a pretty exciting thing. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so that's in beta at the moment. They announced that a few weeks ago. And there's a couple of things there, of course. The first is that, we've obviously had Docker on Linux since Docker was a thing, but that was Docker Engine as opposed to, the desktop application that Windows and users have ended up with in recent times. But now we have Docker Desktop. So I need to learn that, I have been learning that. And it throws up a couple of little differences. Even though it's a beta, it's working remarkably well, but it's just different. So I've been getting to grips with what's different in how it works. And I'm preparing a blog post to sort of help bootstrap people who want to use Docker Desktop and sort of highlight these are some of the things that you might bump into along the way, because chances are you're already running Docker Engine and those two things can get in the way of each other. So I'm going to document that process. And then, of course, you mentioned our extension. We're part of the Docker Desktop Extension Partner Program, and there are specific builds of Docker Desktop that have the extension support enabled. So the version of Docker Desktop for Linux that has the extensions available actually has a bug in it which prevents the engine from working on the new Ubuntu 22.04 LTS, which they have fixed, but not in a build that carries all of the branch enablement for the extensions. Anyway, today Docker furnished us with a staging build of Docker Desktop for Linux, which has all the bugs fixed and the extension enabled. So for the first time today, I was able to actually use our extension on Linux, and I'm very, very happy about that.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, what a moment. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the extensions program, I know we've been talking about it a little bit, but it is still in beta. We've been getting some feedback from the Docker captains and stuff like that on things that, they like about our extension, things that they would like to see improved by the extension. And then I think the big reveal is going to come at DockerCon. It's like the worst kept secret right now. I mean, Docker's blogging about it all the time and stuff like that. So
right.
I think a lot of other people who have extensions in the place have been talking about it. I know we were talking with the team at SNCC and they have an extension and they're excited about that, but they're starting to kind of share that out. So Yeah, should be a pretty cool little launch. Glad the Linux community will be able to help us with it. And if you didn't
Indeed.
have a couple of things to fix on Linux desktop, it wouldn't really be Linux, right? I mean, there's a little bit of this DIY that comes part
It's
and
not
parcel.
that there's anything that needs fixing. It's just different. There are new things that you have to use.
Cool.
For example, the way that you authenticate your sign-in to Docker Hub is different when you do it through Docker Desktop than when you do it through Docker Engine. And of course,
Right.
I've never experienced that before, so I had to learn that process. And, there are, depending on how old your GPG keys are, there are some hoops that you may need to jump through with regards to your GPG agent and things like that. And that's the sort of thing that I'm going to explain. The documentation for the Docker Desktop for Linux is very good, but it just assumes you're starting fresh. And I think that will not often be the case. I see that Big Pod has joined us in the chat. Hello, Big Pod. How you doing? Now, Big Pod, stay awake, because we've got a stretch goal in this stream, it turns out.
Which is what to do when your containerized application doesn't minify with Docker Slim the way you would expect. So we might be doing a little debugging there. But I think on the theme of not starting fresh, that is definitely a good lead into where we are, because this little experiment that we're doing is actually something that I did before I even joined Slim back like more than a year and a half ago. So I'm kind of excited to show what it's like to dust off an old project, and I haven't by any means gone through this one, so it's going to be a little bit of a learning exercise, which will be great. So
this is one of our, if you're a regular around here, you know what this means. It means that we're taking on a bit of a challenge with not too much preparation, so things could get exciting quickly. But also
the old yellow stream.
You're going right the way back before we did any of our Container 101 series, where we got into, how to actually do this stuff, where we both learned the tools, the, Docker Slim and the Slim SaaS platform. Also picked up a bunch of knowledge around best practices. So it must have been interesting for you to look back at this sort of through, with the benefit of, a year's worth of learning.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting that, sort of my context got a lot better, my ability to solve problems, not necessarily as much. There's still a few things that, we'll go through it on the stream. It'll be fun to see. But yeah, I started thinking about it because, of course, Lindsay and Jillian from our team are over at PyCon. So
right.
People are at PyCon, you're checking out stuff at PyCon. We're over there in the startup row. And as somebody who started developing on Python, and still probably, I'd say it's my strongest language and what I do the most stuff in, it kind of just kicked off this little piece of nostalgia for me. And we had shared, I think it was like our third or fourth stream that we did on here, where we did the first kind of Python Flask app and put that through Docker Slim to minify it, and that that app really just returned a success message, and that was all we did. And it's funny to see the stream back then before we got kind of our new set, and I was very new to streaming, and kind of just like a lot of nostalgia going on. And I remembered this exercise that I had done, and I had never published it in a blog post or anything like that, and I was like, oh, this is a pretty good thing for PyCon, because it brings in some of the data science elements from Python, in addition to the web development aspects of Python, and kind of brings them into a container. And it was just the first thing that I thought to do when I was starting at Slim, to try to, get back into Docker, learn a little bit more about Docker Slim, and get into that. So it just felt like a good thing to kind of go back to. But
excellent. Yeah. So where should we start? What is it you're going to be showing us today?
Why don't we start at the browser, and I'll just share. I think you posted it in our Discord, so if people aren't in our Discord,
I will go and get the. In fact, if I just go to my, there we go. I was going to say, if I just go to my screen a second, I have the URL here, and I will paste that in the chat. And
cool.
Anyone that's watching after the fact, you can see you get this from community.slim.ai, where Pete has written up some notes, but I'm putting that in the live chat now. Right then, I'll flip that back to you.
Yeah, and like, like most of our examples that we do on here, this will feel very familiar. There's sort of the build the application, containerize it, run it through Docker Slim. I still have a little more work to do on the write-up, and I'll link the GitHub repository in there that I'm working out of. But if you know my GitHub, it's not hard to find. But this is kind of a fun one. So the kind of problem statement was that I came up with. I'm really into recommendation engines, which not a lot of people know about me. I think people on the stream know that I really like data. I really like sort of machine learning aspects, and I really got into all of these with recommendation systems. I worked at TripAdvisor, so we would do a lot of, what places are like these other places, or if you give a 4-bubble review for this, what are you likely to give, to think is a good hotel? And so we thought a lot about those. And as I was going through it, I remembered this sort of old data science thing from back in my business school days, which was this Scotch data set, and so it's this sort of like fundamental, data set. And, people like technology books. There's this great one called Data Science for Business. It's published by O'Reilly. And that's where I learned about this particular example, which is basically, these French-Canadian data scientists, Pierre Legrand and FJ Lapointe, one day they're talking, they say, hey, look, it's got a lot of variety in it is Scotch. It depends on where it's from. It has certain colors, it has certain tastes, certain aromatic qualities. And, a really good thing that, we could do is go through sort of an old guidebook for Scotches that say, okay, this is the color, this is the varietal, this is the place that it's from. And we'll go through and we'll make a data set out of that. And that'll give us a chance to teach people how to do kind of machine learning,
Right.
and recommendation algorithms, right?
And I imagine not a drop of whiskey passed anyone's lips whilst they were preparing.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure that the people in the universities like a good glass of Scotch. And I think at the time, I was dabbling a little bit in Scotch. I will say I will, be clear on the stream. I no longer drink, so this is tea, though I did put it in a whiskey glass.
What's annoying is that was my idea, and I completely forgot. And I've made a milky tea in a mug, so I completely ruined that.
So
Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know what what flavor or varietal this is. I bet there are good data science data sets out there for tea and similar things, but so this is a fun one. I will say, like I mentioned, kind of like I don't drink anymore. We're going to have some fun with this one and talk about Ron Burgundy and do Scotch stuff. But, by no means, especially if younger people are on the stream or watching this later, or, I know with the pandemic, a lot of people just kind of felt like they were drinking too much and all that kind of stuff. So just want to say, if you're out there and you're following this for the data science and not for the Scotch recommendations, I'm right there with you. You aren't alone. A lot of great communities out there of people who have decided to kind of go the sobriety route, and I'm one of them. So we'll have some fun with this, but please know that it's just if you do consume in moderation, please. And we're just trying to have a little fun with kind of the data science side of it. But
yeah, and usually what we're well known for around here is cups of tea. And cookies. That's usually our data sample set, and socks. Occasionally socks.
Yep. Sugar, socks, and tea. That's kind of the way we do it. So cool. So let's take a look at kind of what this data looks like. Here I've loaded up Jupyter Notebook, which I think the kind of cool thing about Python, what I've always loved about Python, and the reason that I've gotten so deep into it, is that it does a couple things really, really well. And people can, there are downsides to Python. It's not the fastest language. It has kind of like, can have a lot of bloat in it, whatever the case. But it does web development and it does data science really, really well. A lot of data science. I know we have a bunch of people from the R community and R fans here. Between R and Python, those are the two main ways people are doing data science these days. And so when you learn Python, you kind of get this nice benefit of, okay, there's a bunch of web frameworks that you can do, and there's a bunch of data science frameworks that you can play around with. And, between that, you can kind of make these fun little apps, these fun little like thought experiments. And that's what we would do a lot at TripAdvisor, is just to build these little proof of concept demos and say, hey, look, we could do something that's kind of fun like this.
And
So-
you're preaching to the choir on
Yeah.
sort of the benefits of Python, because in the past I used to work for Flight Data Services, and we wrote the web application in Python with Django. We wrote our flight data analysis algorithms with Python and SciPy and NumPy, and we even wrote the tooling to do the forensic recovery of black box flight data with Python as well. We're a small outfit, so we picked one language that could do all of the things, and Python was that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of first got in, I showed the book Data Science for Business. That was actually from one of my business school classes at MIT Sloan. And I kind of got into the data science side of Python because I didn't want to do any of our data models and decisioning work in Excel. They have these sort of like Excel tools for like Solver and these things that could do these sort of optimizations. And I said, I know how to program. I can write Python. I do it for web development. Let's learn it for data science. And now now I'm off and running, and then just got kind of obsessed with it, to be honest. So cool. But so just pulled it into Jupyter Notebook, and I'm just basically loading the CSV of the data file. I did a little bit of data cleanup prior to doing this, a little bit of data munging just for kind of the sake of the demo. But here I'm using Pandas, which is effectively like, I don't know, I don't want to insult anybody in the Pandas community here, but it's kind of like Excel for for Python. It's much more powerful than Excel, but it allows you to do sort of this like tabular data, and it does it through these things called data frames. So that's what the DF stands for, but this is effectively what we're looking at as a data frame. And you can see that this data set is more or less, it's a bunch of kind of like sparse matrices for like ones and zeros of, here's the color, wine, yellow, very pale, pale. You have, of course, a district, which then also becomes, sort of this sparse matrix. And we can kind of look down and see, okay, here's all of the different data points that are in this data set, from the color to the nose, to the body, to the palette, I believe is this one, is it oil or spice or smoke, dirt, rope, whatever. And then the finish, and then some other kind of like metadata around that. So I kind of ran through, and I won't go through exactly what I did, mostly just because I don't want the real data scientists in the chat to tell me where I got it wrong, but there is that case. But I went through and I sort of like built out some like data, just some data munging here, and where I landed was with a thing that, and I tried a number of different kind of models to run through those. So the first one was logistic regression. That's a good place to start. This particular data set is used in a lot of the examples in the books for like a nearest neighbors approach, and that's one way that you could make a model. So here I'm building a few of those, but where I really wound up was, and I learned this trick from a data scientist at TripAdvisor. His name's Pei Sui, and he's now at LinkedIn and doing all kinds of cool stuff at LinkedIn. But there's a thing called cosine similarity matrix, and that's just basically like, doing some data magic, and maybe Eric or Aisha can explain what it's actually doing. But what it gives you is this sort of matrix that will give you all of the scotches down one side as the columns, and then all of the scotches down the other side as the rows. And it's just going to say, these two scotches are this similar given all of this data that you just threw at us, right? So here, what we're looking at is Dalwhinnie, which was my favorite back in my Scotch drinking days. I will pretend this is Dalwhinnie, but, and if I sort the values, I can see, okay, these are actually the scotches that are the closest to Dalwhinnie, and this is the percentage sort of closeness in a way that they are. Okay.
Excellent.
So cool. So that's kind of like our data science thing. Let's bump over to the to VS Code, and I'll show you how I kind of like coded this into get out of the notebook here, clear this out, and we can kind of bring this down. So, so I'm not doing anything too crazy smart here, but all I'm doing is, so I'm pulling Pandas into this just to do some of the data munging pieces. And then I grab this cosine similarity model from, and maybe you guys want this to be a little bigger, from Sklearn, which is scikit-learn. That's kind of the big mega data science package for Python, so if you're working with data science in Python, you're probably working with scikit-learn. You mentioned NumPy and SciPy; those sort of sit underneath scikit-learn and empower it. So those will be in pretty much anything that you work on. And when you get into kind of the neural network stuff, you'll be looking at TensorFlow and PySpark and those types of libraries. But scikit-learn is kind of a good model building thing, and we're pulling in this one cosine similarity kind of component there, and then we're just doing some Flasky bits, and we build out sort of this cosine similarity just using some of the data that we've created, and then we use that to create something of a mapping of like, okay, this Scotch is like these other Scotches in this way, and we do some sorting. Now we could put all of this into a database. We don't really necessarily need to calculate this like on the fly. But I didn't really want to do that when I was first getting into everything, because I really didn't understand how databases work, as people on the stream can attest. And so I just kind of load this all into memory. It's not a very big data set and all of that. And then I just build out some pretty simple, it's almost, honestly, it's like more or less like a single page app. I have two routes, like a home page, but they basically load the same page just with different data. And that's just like a super cheap way of creating that. Nothing special about the HTML file, it's just basic Jinja. We could, of course, now we know we can build this into Vue and do all of that. And, again, nothing like super special about the Docker file, though. I did want to go back and look at a couple of, I think there are a couple interesting things here, and I'd like to kind of dive into them. So one is that, like, when I was first starting out, you'll see these containers up here. And I'm going to talk about this for a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build from this one base image that's called Tiangolo UWSGI Nginx Flask with the Flask label on it. Okay. And so just remember that I'm doing that. And I'm going to do, I was doing a lot of Docker stuff. I'll just come up with the magic incantation. I'm going to Docker build. I'll call this one, I'm calling this the Ron Rex, because Ron Burgundy, kind of the patron saint of Scotch. And I'm gonna call this one, I'll just call this one Flask for right now. So I'm gonna just start building that. Oh wait, but that didn't work. Hold on, let me stop that. I didn't save it. It's always my problem. So I'm going to build this. And while that's building, I'm going to talk to you about like what this image is. So when I was starting out with Docker, and this was like, right before I joined Slim, and I used Docker a little bit, but I didn't really understand it. And I kind of knew how to build Python apps with pip install and requirements and stuff like that. But I really believed that I needed highly specific containers that were pre-built and ready for my container. So when I first, started researching this, I went to Docker Hub and I searched for Flask, right? Because I was like, oh, this is going to be a Flask app, and my expectation was that I would find like the Flask community supported Docker container, and that's where you drop your Flask apps in. And I didn't find that, but I did find this one, which, I know what WSGI is, right? Because that's how Flask is running its app. And I had set Flask apps up in AWS instances where I had to do all of the WSGI work. I had to set up either Gunicorn or Apache. I had to do all the kind of whiz-bang stuff to figure out how to make those two things talk to each other and kind of serve the app out of the container. So I knew all of that stuff, but I didn't know how any of it applied to containers. And so I found this one from Tiangolo, who it turns out Tiangolo is Sebastian Ramirez. He's Docker captain. He's the creator of the Fast API project, which is sort of like the next coming of Flask, or at least it's a way of doing APIs really quickly. And so really respected person, really knows what he's doing. And he had built this image as kind of a convenient sort of a community thing for people who were looking for a production grade server to use for Docker, because Flask is not a production grade server, right?
Yeah.
So kind of cool. I didn't actually know any of that. And if we kind of jump back to the web browser, I think this sort of gets into some of these like qualification questions that we have, right? Where I know for sure that I could just put this into the I'm just gonna search for this one. Put this into the Python Flask. Oh, what did I do? I think I might have messed up my thing here. Let me just log in again. I know I could drop this into Python. I know I could drop this into Ubuntu. But if you find these sort of third-party apps out there, and if you're on Docker Hub, or this is the Slim.AI portal, right? Like, 4.1 million pulls, almost 500 likes. This looks like a pretty legit thing, and for the most part, it should be. In the documentation, obviously, Sebastian's written a bunch of great information. And I actually just like learned a lot going through this as I was trying to kind of learn and do and figure all of this out, including a few kind of gotchas that are down here a little later on. But my belief was really like, this is what I needed to use Flask, not to use the Python or to like install from Ubuntu. I really thought that was going to take me a lot longer. I sort of knew I could do that, but I thought it was going to take me a lot longer. So it was pretty interesting from that point of view. But then I hit this next thing, which is if you go back over to VS Code and I go to run, and I'll do remove, and I'll map my ports right. If I go to run that container that I just built, run Rex Flask, I called it, right? So Docker run. Yep, that should be good. Wait, what did I do? Oh, this is not DP. So right, this is running and it looks pretty good for that.
Oops, I pressed the wrong button. There we go. Oh, back to you. There we go.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So like, okay, I did something wrong there, and it's running with Python 2.7, and this is all kind of like confusing. This is like a hello world thing, right? So, okay, so let me think about that again, right? That was actually kind of not what I expected out of that, if I'm being honest. But so I'm building from the Tiangolo Flask one, and
is it the second from line in the Docker file, which specifically references 3.7?
Well, those are commented out. So there are a couple. I think I was expecting something slightly different from this one, but I think I know what happened. So what happened is, like, this application just requires that this was the first gotcha that I was just showing from the documentation.
Right. Yes.
Was that it requires you to do this. So I can't do my sort of local development environment where my app's going to be on port 5000 like I normally expect. It has to be on this port over here. So I'm just going to build that again.
Right.
But something like really funky is going to happen here, which I think is a little telling and definitely sort of scared me away when I was first getting into Docker. I was like, I just have no idea what I'm doing here. And I'm just trying to build a simple little cosine similarity model. And this has gotten really complicated really, really quickly. And so once this finishes building, I'll kind of show you what I mean. Should be in a minute. So I'm just going to run that same app again. And we got the same result, which was also not expected. So what am I doing wrong here? Let me think about this. Well, yeah. So I think it's something with this particular app, and I did get this to work at one point, and I will see if I can do this again. But the thing is, when you do get this to work, what happens is that you get an error actually in the printout, and it's kind of funny. There's a little cow that comes up, and it's saying, in the words of Sebastian Ramirez, "Don't use this image. This image is deprecated."
I see.
Don't use latest. You need to use this Python 3.7, which was the most recent one I could find. But now I look on the documentation in the Slim portal and see there's actually a 3.8 that I can use. So I can't replicate that right now. I'm trying to figure out what I did differently this time that is making it so I'm not replicating that. But that like really kind of threw me off, and I was like very surprised by that. And I was like, okay, well, wait. There's this image that's available on Docker Hub, but I'm not supposed to use it. I'm supposed to use this other thing. And then I started getting into it, and sort of the recommendations, like if you're starting a new project, you should just use Fast API or use WSGI, which are probably true, but I wasn't like ready to make that leap yet. I just thought I was going to grab this Flask image and it was going to work. So that was sort of like, reflecting back, like how little we knew, that was kind of an interesting moment. I know, and and we all know now, I can just switch this base image over to the Python Slim image, and it'll build pretty quickly because, it's going to go through and install a bunch of things, scikit-learn and pandas and all these kinds of things that we need. And there you see SciPy getting installed because that's, a dependency for scikit-learn. Also worth noting, like a lot of these packages are pretty big. I'm going to build from the
well, I noticed that image that you built was, I think, 360 meg using that other thing. And, we've proven many times over, if you start with, a base image for an OS and build up, you can keep, even a fat container can be much smaller if you start that way rather than one that's prefabricated with, everything including the kitchen sink.
Right. So that probably, starting from Python latest here, and I would have a gigabyte image plus whatever I was going to pull in from scikit-learn, which is, again, not a small package. But so let me run this one, and then we can bump over to the browser, and we should, oh wait, hold on. I ran the wrong one. Hold on. No big deal. Just give me 1 minute. Okay.
All right. Okay.
And I just needed to change the image that I had. Okay. So hello, Ron Burgundy, and I obviously have some CSS work that I need to do on this. That was what I was trying to do right before we joined. But here I've got my list of whiskeys, and if I go down and I choose, I'm not sure if anybody in the chat has a favorite whiskey or Scotch that they care about. Martin, do you have one in particular that you know and love?
Do, but it's Irish.
Oh, all right. I'm not sure.
I tell you what, let me try and think of one. How about Glenmorangie? That's quite well known, isn't it?
Okay, Glenmorangie. So this looks like the right one. Glenmorangie. So then we reply back that the ones that are similar to Glenmorangie are Bowmore and Lafrogue and Iridor and Talisker and Clinolish. I think I've actually had most of those before.
It's interesting seeing those names. I once worked somewhere, this is in the good old bad old days, before containers and really before virtualization was a thing and every server was a pet, and somebody had set up all of the servers and named them after Scotch whiskies, and I've never had so much difficulty logging into servers in my life because I could never remember how to spell those names of the servers.
Yes, and a lot of OAIGs and ADOURs and CLI.
I shall also say that Big Pod in chat was paying attention when you were using that original container image, because he says the console output did say it's not a production server. So I think maybe the big speaking cow that you talked about has been changed with a more subtle message.
Oh yeah, potentially. It was interesting. I mean, I think Flask does say that most of the time. I'm actually seeing that on this one now too. But yeah, it was a very interesting moment to get like a message of you should not be using the server in the output of a Docker build or a Docker run.
Right.
So one, kudos to creativity to Sebastian Ramirez, because that was just, it's clever, to say that.
That
but also just,
utility is called cowsay. So if you install cowsay on your system, you can just type cowsay in a message and the speaking cow will appear.
Oh, no kidding. This is like a Linux thing that I was not aware of. This is like, oh, okay.
And
okay. All right, good to know.
If like me, you've got 7 nieces, you quickly learn about pony say, which is coloured ASCII graphics and ANSI graphics of all of the characters from My Little Pony that do the same thing.
Oh my gosh! Oh man, open source people have a lot of time on their hands. That's great. I know it. It makes a lot of sense now. I was learning Rust, as everybody knows, on the stream. Back over the holidays, and one of the first hello worlds that you do is actually what's the Rust crab's name? Ferris. It's Ferris says, and so you get like a little Ferris crab that's ANSI colored, and he'll say anything that you want him to as part of your hello world app. So cool. Okay, so interesting. Okay, we have Ron Burgundy. He knows how to recommend scotches to us. There are a couple other things that I thought were interesting, just in kind of dusting off this old project that I had that I kind of had forgotten about, and a lot's changed since then. And the first was, if we go back over to the to VS Code, right? So I had this requirements.txt file from way back in the day, and I had all these, I didn't know I was doing this at the time, but I was pinning my dependencies, because all of these have major and minor versions, and this was the output of pip freeze, and I had to do a little munging around in here to because some of the pip freeze references were actually references to files, and I had never seen that before, but I think that might be some sort of issue with when you use Anaconda, which is the data science distribution of Python. And you start with an Anaconda environment, and then you pip freeze that to create your requirements.txt. There's some things that are just used as references. So I went through and I pinned all of these dependencies, but now that was a year and a half ago, right? Lots happened in Python land in a year and a half. And when I went to run this container, I had all kinds of kind of like pip issues and all of that. So what I did was I tried to go back and sort of delete out, and I was like, okay, I only really need Flask and Pandas, and I need what was the last one? Scikit-learn, right? So like all of the other things that are in this requirements.txt file are getting pulled in by those 3 libraries. Those are the only 3 that I explicitly need for this environment, right? And I tried to do that, but I still had just these environments. These versions were either no longer available, or the Python Slim, the current Python Slim, has some sort of like dependency logjam that's not allowing, it's just like time has moved on. Now if I had pinned the version of my Docker file, all of this should have worked, but it was still a time capsule from a year and a half ago, right? So I needed to do sort of all of these updates and do that, and the way I ended up doing that was just actually creating a very simple requirements.txt. And so this is not great from a supply chain security perspective, in that I'm just grabbing whatever the latest version is, and that might have some breaking change in the future.
Not great for reproducibility either, because between one build and another, you could have a minor or major version bump in any of those modules.
Right. But again, when it just these challenges that you run into as you're kind of building these containers, and you might not know any different. It's like the difference between the tutorial version of Docker, where it's like, just pip freeze requirements.txt and Docker build, and you're off and going, versus kind of managing things over time. So that was just another complication that I thought was interesting. The other thing that I wanted to do, so I think two other little things, and I know we're kind of coming up on time, but the thing I really wanted to dive into, and maybe we save it for another stream, but is, the one thing that we know about the data science containers is that they're humongous, right? Like the PySpark TensorFlow container is like 3 or 4 gigabytes, and these just happen to be really, really large packages, and then they tend to just have a lot of stuff that kind of like comes along with them. And then in some cases you have models that come in here. And what I really wanted to do was kind of use the Slim platform to look in and see, how much of this do I actually need, right? I only need this part, the cosine similarity part, and then whatever related dependencies it has, right? I don't need all of scikit-learn, logistic regression, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I do need logistic regression. I don't know how cosine similarity works, but it's very likely that I don't need this entire package in order for everything to kind of work correctly. And and I just wonder that about the kind of data science container. So, so I went into the Slim portal, and again, if you go back to kind of the web browser, I pushed this image that I built up to a registry, and here we have Ron recommends, and I have the latest version, and so I can go in and analyze and view that. And take a look at this. What I wasn't able to do, and what I wish I could do, is use Docker Slim to slim this, and then look at the diff between those things. Because I think what would happen would be that Docker Slim would say, hey, you're using cosine similarity, and here's all the things that we see light up and work when you do that cosine similarity calculation. Everything else we'll get rid of, and we'll go from there. But maybe I think I don't have the right Docker Slim magic incantation. But I was able to kind of go in and through a little bit of digging, and I'll just show kind of how naive I was about doing this. I was like, well, where does scikit-learn live in this container? Well, it's in user local lib Python 3, right? Okay, cool. So I can kind of come in here and go through and see where all of these packages are linked in my file explorer, and come into Python 3. And now there's a lot of stuff in here. As an average Python person, you wouldn't really be kind of like sorting through all of this, but if I come down into site packet, I can just start to get a sense of everything that's in here that I may or may not need. Like SQLite's in here, Maybe SQLite's used by Pandas. I don't really know. It might be, but it might
probably
be being
not
used by
unless you deliberately instantiate a data store.
Right. Or you're doing like a Jupyter Notebook data frame, like we were looking at before, or something like that, right? So, and then I can kind of come in and inspect some of these. So, one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of people do is, and I'll have to scroll up to the very top of this, but what we have here in the Slim platform is this. It's a little cryptic, but this is the layer in which this thing was either added, modified, deleted, or ignored. So the people that kind of are learning that are coming in and they're looking at these layers and they're saying, oh, okay, like a lot's changing in layers 1, 2, and 4 in my Etsy folder. Okay, let me kind of dive into that. I happen to remember seeing that it's actually layer 6 where a lot of my stuff is getting added. And that's not a great constructed container, right? Back to container best practices. Like all of my stuff is being added in layer 6. So I'd probably want to go through and improve that. But here I can filter to just root 6, and I kind of go down, and I'm in user local bin, and I'm seeing all of these things being added, and I can kind of go down and sort through things that way into site packages, and get down into scikit-learn. So this is like the beginnings for me, and probably don't have time to go through the whole thing, in starting to say like, okay, well, like what's in this container that I actually need, and what is the rest of it are like unused files that might represent either attack surface or just generally bloat, because I'm not really using that much in this container.
I mean, we've seen this. Just last week, we were using a sample Flask application, really to look at constructing a container image that were everything was identical, except we used Ubuntu 20.04 for one of the images and Ubuntu 22.04 for the other. But the app and the Docker file were identical, and our very simple Flask Hello World API app, I think the containers were close to 400 megabytes each when we generated them. And then after we slimmed them, they were 25 megabytes. So, I imagine you were looking for a similar sort of win on the reductive process. But then more importantly, is you were hoping to use these tools to then see, well, this is what was thrown away and this is what's been left behind. And now I understand where those sort of critical components that are actually in the execution path of your application, where they live and exist on the system.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think, for people who are going to DockerCon, and if you haven't signed up for DockerCon yet, please do. There's a really great example in the talk that Josh and Matthias from PaymentWorks do, where Matthias actually was like, he knew that he had some bloat in his container. He just couldn't figure out why or what he was doing wrong or whatever the case was. And he used our Docker extension to basically go through this layers. He knew like what he was adding in each layer. And so he started filtering down by layer. Then that led him to a folder. In that folder was a bunch of cache data that he was just kind of inadvertently copying over in the container build process. And he said, okay, I actually don't want to copy that folder over because it's just cache data. It's going to get rebuilt anyway. So I actually don't need that data, that cache data in there. And I can remove it. And that saved him, something like 200 megabytes in his container. So pretty useful kind of tool, a little low level. I'm not still sure that I completely understand it, but I can understand it from this perspective where, okay, I know that I'm using cosine similarity to create this kind of POC Scotch recommendation thing, right? Now, I know I need that, but I also know that scikit-learn has a million things in it. It's a very powerful tool, but I don't need all of those for this application. So are they there? Can they be removed? How would I do that? And that's sort of going down that path. So cool. That's pretty much what I got. If we have a couple more minutes, we could kind of try to do some live debugging of getting this Docker Slim to work on this container, though I haven't successfully done that yet. But yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts from the chat? Any questions?
There was a couple of observations. So there was some discussion about bits and pieces. So let me just roll back to a few things. So first of all, I saw this from Paddy in the chat, where he said he went to the wonderful Scottish Isle of is it Islay or Islay? I can't remember how they pronounce it, over the Easter for a week. And it has a population of 3,209 whiskey distilleries.
Nice. Yes, I have been there as well. I actually went to a trip to Aviemore, I think you pronounce it, Aviemore, Scotland, Aviemore. And that's just on the other side. It's on the mainland from the Isle of, that's across from Isle of Skye, which also has a lot of kind of whiskey distilleries and stuff. And that's very close to where Dalwhinnie's located. And that's why I kind of fell in love with that one. But there they would actually pour water out of the heather, and it would be sort of this color. And it'd have a little peaty taste. It was water, but you could really see where sort of the Scotch came from there. So that was pretty cool. So
wow.
And you can put the Scotch recommender to the test. Maybe I'll figure out a way to. My big goal for this was to actually like build a CI/CD pipeline for this thing as well, and then I'd be able to host it somewhere. So maybe I can do that.
That would have certainly been helpful for Paddy, who'd got 9 distilleries to choose from.
Yes, certainly. There's probably other good Scotch recommendations out there from other data scientists who have used this data set, but I do put a link to the data set in the article that's on our discourse. So Paddy, if you want to play around with it and come up with some of your own recommendations, or just compare, which types of nose and finish and all of that were from the ones that you liked.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a fun thing to do.
So here we go. Here's the here's Pete's notes on this, and I will put that back into the chat again for those of you that arrived partway through, want to have a look at this. So Eric says that he's very interested in taking a look at this. It sounds like he's been having an interesting afternoon, getting some data science containers, working through reverse proxies and VPN and tunnel endpoints and what have you.
Ooh, networking.
It's always a DNS problem. That's
always a DNS problem. Always a DNS problem. Yeah, well, it's interesting for this use case too. I mean, I think something that we didn't talk about a ton, but is like, could you use an Alpine image for this to do sort of more of the container slimming? I think with some of the data science package, I don't know this for sure, but I think with some of the data science packages, there's a big dependency on wheel, kind of a core Python package. And I know there's some compatibility issues with wheel and muscle, libc, all these kind of lower level things that I don't really totally understand. But, I'd be kind of interested to try that as an Alpine image and see. It might be that it's such a simple app that it doesn't have much of an impact, but certainly I would be a little nervous about that if, we're using scikit-learn in a pretty advanced context or something like that and running into issues like that. But
yeah, I mean, so the conventional wisdom is that Alpine and Python are not good bedfellows. So you mentioned this earlier, and we were thinking about digging into that today, but we've decided that could be a topic worth exploring in its own right. So let's take a Python app built on maybe one of the Python base images, which are typically use Debian, I think, as their base, or build it on top of Ubuntu or something like that, and then actually go through the process of taking that same app and building it on top of Alpine and seeing exactly what issues that we run into. Because you were saying there are some low level sort of complexities with things like muscle versus libc, which you're not familiar with. Well, thankfully, hello.
Yeah,
I might be able to help
world,
there.
Yeah. Your world for sure. Yeah, and it'd be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would be curious to try this with a couple other base images and kind of like explore. I was kind of hoping we could at some point get Sebastian Ramirez on here. I'd love to just talk to him. Well, this initial sort of exploration sort of frustrated me with the just kind of knowing which image to pick and which starting point for my application. Ultimately I learned a lot. I think Fast API, we're using that actually in some other parts, which I actually owe Eric because he had asked for some of our container data. So I'm going to share that with him. But we're using Fast API in other places. And, it really is a very well documented sort of set of starting points for containers. And I'd love to hear more from him about, how he builds these containers, what their use cases are, why, support a community image that seems pretty narrow in scope, as opposed to, say, starting with Ubuntu or something like that.
So Eric says that on the R side of things, they do use Debian and Ubuntu as their sort of primary choice for the base images. And BigPod, which is Primoz, who, of course, works with us one moment, says that it's not. It shouldn't be difficult to make your app work with Docker Slim. So that's encouraging. I have an idea. Maybe BigPod has a better idea. And he says, and yes, Alpine can be a pain with everything. It's not just a Python thing. I've certainly encountered some unexpected performance impact using Alpine as a base because of it using muscle instead of libc. But then again, if you're doing something like Golang, then it's fine.
Right. Go, Rust.
Those sort of statically compiled, highly optimized things, they tend to be fine.
Yep. Cool. Okay, well, great. Well, sounds good. Well, cool. Thanks everybody for indulging me in that. That this article is very nearly the very first article that I published when I joined Slim.AI, and I figured that probably wasn't a great look for me joining a new company and then just publishing an article about Scotch recommendations. But
Well, if only we had a time machine, because our colleague Aisha's here and she says, that I'm more into martinis these days, but Scotch captured my interest. So maybe if it was a martini recommendation engine, you might have been able to get away with it.
Okay, yeah. I'm wondering like other data sets. I wonder if we need to come up with like a tea and cookies
Yeah,
data set.
I
I would be
think
surprised if there's not
I
a good tea
think
one out
tea.
there.
I think tea, maybe
Yeah.
coffee. There must definitely be similar data
Oh,
sets available for tea and coffee. You'd have thought, wouldn't you?
yes. Excellent. So,
And
yeah.
I imagine even on the Isle of Wight, which is not far from where I am right now, it's
Mhm,
famous for its
mhm.
garlic farm. They have a very
Oh.
large garlic farm, and garlic is the bulb from the orchid family. And
Mhm.
so, depending on the sort of genus of the flower, the garlic bulbs have different scents, aromas, and tastes.
Oh, okay.
So I
Love
wonder,
to
I
know.
wonder if that may even be something that data exists for.
Yeah, I'm feeling very like big box American right now. I never knew that. I thought garlic was just garlic and you just go and buy it in bulk. So, good to know. Um, Yeah, well, recommendation systems are one of my favorite things. I really geek out about them. So if people want to geek out about recommendation systems, uh, come in Discord, ping me at PSV. We can talk recommendation systems until I'm blue in the face. I've been known to have a glass of scotch and bore my family and neighbors with tales of recommendation engines. So,
Fabulous. So we will be streaming again at probably the same time, same place next week. Although
mhm,
I have a little project on the go at the moment, and that may require that I do a stream because I need to figure a few things out. And I thought it might
hmm,
be worth doing on a stream or maybe in
cool.
office hours in our Discord, because I need to just have a sit and think and do and work out what all of the bear traps that I need to walk into are in order to prepare a blog post. So I've got two little projects. So what I'm going to do is, after this, I'm going to ask the community in Discord. You can find our Discord above my head at Slim.AI. Which would you like to see next? I've got a couple of options. We could even do a how low can you go with
Mm,
Ubuntu. So make an Ubuntu base image from scratch that's
mhm,
smaller than the officially published image from Canonical, but still able to run container apps built
mhm,
on top of it. So that's one
mhm.
little project I'm looking at. And the other is we talked about at the top of the stream, which is I've been doing a bunch of stuff with Docker Desktop for Linux and also the Docker Desktop extension stuff. And
Mhm.
I need to firm up and figure out all of the little gotchas with that. So I could do a stream on either of those topics. I'd be interested for people to let me know in our Discord which of those would you like to see next, and we can figure out which one
Yeah.
we schedule first.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I will share my news now, which is I will be out for a little bit from the Twitch streams. I will be. My wife is 39 weeks and 2 days pregnant right now, and we are expecting our first boy any day. So when he comes, we will. I'll be out for a few weeks, and Slim.ai has been very generous with paternity leave time and that. So and my colleagues, obviously some of who are in the stream, are picking up some of the slack that I'll be leaving behind. But so I'll see you all in 6 to 7 weeks with probably some bags under my eyes, perhaps a crying baby in my arm, perhaps um, you know covered in spit up or whatever the case is. But we're very excited, and so looking forward to that. So.
The baby fog is a wonderful time of your life, and I'm certain you're going to enjoy yourselves. And whilst you go through that sort of paternity leave, it's quite a packed schedule of conferences and events that are coming up. So also, head into our Discord. Again, just go to the website above my head and you'll find the links, because we're going to be, well, in fact, today we've got 2 of our colleagues heading to PyCon, and that's just the start of some of the events that we're going to be at, and we'll be sharing sort of news from the conference floor as we pick up the trends and the feels from the different events that we're going to.
Yeah, and I think we'll have kind of a packed schedule around Twitch and sort of events in Discord around DockerCon. So people who are going to DockerCon, please join us in Discord, and you'll hear about all the kind of Twitch streams. We're gonna have a bunch of our engineers talking about how they built the Docker extensions, or designer talked about how he designed it. A lot of kind of, we might get some Docker people on to kind of come and jam with us. And so I think that'll be really great. And then of course we'll be at KubeCon EU on May 2nd and 3rd, actually right before DockerCon. This is early next week. We'll be at DevExConf. So that's an awesome one. If you guys haven't signed up for that one, it's a free conference. So that one's really cool. It's all virtual, but it's got a really great vibe put on by the big Gitpod people. I almost said the big pod people. And just a lot of other stuff. And then we'll be at Open Source Summit, in June, of course. So
indeed,
a lot of great stuff. Yeah.
Right. Well, there we go. That was good fun. I'm gonna seek out a T-based data set and see if we can't get back to our traditional sort of topic matter.
yeah I think we could take where we left off with the amazing photo app and add some recommendation tools and perhaps a database. Maybe we even monetize that, get a little like affiliate revenue going, so
get some responsive design working, so it's a PWA, and we're in business.
Yep. Totally sounds great. So
brilliant. Right, well, thank you all for coming, everyone. Do head to our Discord. Let me know if you want me to tackle making the Ubuntu container images even smaller, or looking at Docker desktop for Linux. It looks like there's some early votes for taking the Ubuntu How Low Can You Go challenge. So Big Pod and I have had a stab at that in the past, but we didn't make it any bigger. It actually ended up something... we didn't make anything smaller. We ended up something bigger than we started with. So our starting position is challenging, but, how hard can it be?
Yeah, Big Pod. It must have Firefox in it. No, just kidding. I was going to say maybe the rule should be like an Ubuntu noob like myself should be able to use it. I should be able to build a container from it, I should say.
Yeah, I think it should be a drop-in replacement. If you've got a working container image based on one of the, like Ubuntu latest, for example, it should still work with our light version.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. It's a cool idea.
Right then. That. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you soon. Get followed and all that, and set your notifications on, because it could be ad hoc streams happening here, and also in the Discord. So, like, subscribe, and all of those internet things that you need to do these days. And I'll see you very soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.